Если драка неизбежна, бить надо первым.
If the pot doesn't boil, the regime boils. Countries focused on authority and governance don't care what their citizens think. The Moscow administration is the most important example of this in our time. Putin is at boiling point but doesn't care what his people eat. It should be remembered that historically, popular uprisings that overthrew regimes were usually caused by hunger, scarcity, thirst. In short, tensions created by the economy. Russia may be at the most critical juncture of this turning point. From Russia's most elite streets to its rural areas, there is a food crisis stemming from the war economy. People are struggling to obtain even basic foodstuffs. Soviet-style practices to combat the food crisis have resurfaced in today's Russia. The Russian government is preparing to introduce food stamps for the first time since 1991. The food stamps proposed by Russia are electronic cards that will be given to low-income citizens, pensioners, and large families starting in 2025, allowing them to purchase state-approved food items, excluding alcohol and tobacco. Due to a 13.7% real increase in food prices in Russia, coupons worth between 2,000 and 6,000 rubles are attempting to heal the wounds of the food crisis for Russian citizens. This is because Russian citizens' taxes, salaries, and bonuses are being cut, and these cuts are being spent on military resources. Consequently, all economic strata in the country are experiencing difficulties in carrying out their daily routines. Supermarkets, greengrocers, butchers and other shops in Russia are among the places where inflation is felt most deeply. The numbers on the market receipt are more convincing than the promises on Russian state television. As the weight on the shelves decreases, the same product becomes more expensive. Focusing on butter prices as a harbinger of Russia's economic crisis is symbolic, because butter literally embodies the civilian side of the classic guns or butter economic model discussed in articles on this subject. Butter provides us with a perfect conceptual symmetry where theory meets reality. Here, the theoretical butter in the economic model has become a real indicator of the same trade-off in Russia's current economy. Rising butter prices signal that the federal budget is prioritizing defense over butter. Currently, a kilogram of butter costs 1,100 rubles. This means the price increase for this food item has reached 115%. 20 million Russian citizens are feeling all these negative effects of the food crisis acutely. The rest of the country's population is also in a very deep food crisis. But this figure we have given is the lowest point of the crisis. What about the money in Russian citizens' pockets? While wage increases offer hope on paper, the shopping cart quickly erases that hope. Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United 24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support. Now let's get back to our main topic. The line at the gas station adds to the negative side of the picture. People are no longer going to the market. They are waiting for bill day with dread. Russian citizens are drifting away from everyday life into a world reminiscent of the pages of a dystopian novel. This was triggered by Vladimir Putin's ambition to seize Ukrainian territory. Since 2022, the Russian economy has entered a process of inevitable collapse and transformation, along with the costs of war. However, the events of the last 2 months have made it inevitable that this is no longer just an economic crisis, but also a humanitarian one. As of July 2025, increases in housing and public service tariffs have had a direct impact on millions of households. Increases in basic services such as electricity, water, natural gas, and garbage collection ranged from 8.6% to 21.1%, while heating costs, especially in cold regions, have weighed heavily on the public. This was not just a matter of bills. It meant the helplessness of people who did not know whether they would be able to turn on their heaters when winter came. During the same period, inflation officially appeared to have fallen to 8.79% annually. But these figures did not reflect the reality of the Russian people's refrigerators, kitchens, and markets. The annual increase in food prices exceeded 10.79%, which was not just a number, but the real name of a daily struggle for survival. Because food has now become more of a luxury than a necessity for millions in Russia.
Позор нашему правительству. Единственное, я могу сказать, позор.
Basic items such as bread, milk, butter, and eggs have become products that pensioners, single-income families, and millions struggling to get by on minimum wage can barely afford. While the price of bread has nearly tripled since the end of 2022, By mid-2025, the price of just 1 kilogram of potatoes had surpassed 3 times last year's price. In other words, even the simplest meal on the table has now become an unattainable dream. Products such as meat, cheese, and yogurt are frustrating the public not only with their prices, but also with their constant unavailability on supermarket shelves. Price spikes in volatile items such as eggs and vegetables take away even the small relief at the beginning of the month for low-income citizens within a few days. Let's consider the budget of an average Russian household of 4 based on basic needs. The average income starts to be divided before it even reaches your hands. The first deduction is housing expenses, rent or maintenance fees, plus electricity, natural gas, water, and waste disposal fees, which eat up another third of the salary at the beginning of the month. The second major expense is the kitchen. Food expenses now consistently consume 35 to 40% of the income pie. However, this percentage does not change even when people make do with basic foods. When items such as meat or dairy products are added to the basket, the percentage approaches 50%. Transportation and fuel price increases in the summer shake up this fixed picture with a second wave. Moreover, life is not just about bills. Stationary expenses during the school year, sudden health expenses in the middle of the year, or seasonal expenses such as winter shoes for children create holes in the budget. None of these fall into the big expense category, but together they shake the household economy. In some areas, families can only afford to prepare breakfast for their children with a few slices of bread and tea. Retirees get by on just water and pasta in the last days of the month. In the back streets of cities, the number of people searching through market trash for unspoiled products is increasing every day. In this kind of subsistence basket, the word savings is erased from the dictionary. It is considered a feat not to put anything aside, but to make it through the month, because a single unexpected bill is enough to ruin all plans. Unfortunately, the solution is not production, but postponement. People are turning to credit cards, consumer loans, and installment purchases. Passing today's expenses onto tomorrow has become a survival reflex. But as interest rates rise, the cost of debt also multiplies. Debt service, i.e. credit and installment payments, has become one of the new fixed expenses for households. When this cycle is not broken, the inevitable outcome begins. The middle class slides downward. Families who once could save, plan vacations, and educate their children are now forced to live day by day, chasing weekly supermarket discounts. Fluctuations in fuel prices have become one of the areas where regional differences in Russia are most clearly reflected. In recent weeks, gas station shelves have emptied and pumps have fallen silent, especially in remote areas. As queues stretched for miles, limits per litre and daily quotas left both private vehicle users and small businesses helpless. Regions such as the Far East, the Southern Route, and Crimea were hit hardest by this wave. Several structural reasons lie behind this harsh wave. Attack-related disruptions in refinery capacity have still not been compensated for. Demand suddenly skyrocketed, with the high driving demand during the summer months and the peak of the agricultural season. At the same time, the export window became attractive and domestic market demand peaked. The result was an internal conflict over every drop of fuel coming out of the refineries. Should it be exported or distributed domestically? Temporary export bans, bureaucratic intermediary restrictions, and central control measures were put in place. However, this only bought time rather than providing a solution. This is because the real problem lies not in production, but in distribution and security. As refineries are hit, logistics centers falter, and freight traffic slows, tensions rise at pumps in rural areas. This fuel shortage has started to feed small-scale black markets. Some stations have explicitly imposed litre limits and applied daily sales quotas. Drivers sometimes had to wait in multiple lines in different cities. This dramatic picture hit the rural economy with a chain reaction of effects. Transportation costs increased. This increase was most quickly reflected in food prices. Freight companies, vegetable trucks, and transport cooperatives passed on the increased fuel costs directly to product prices. In large cities, this impact was limited because the infrastructure is strong, distances are short, and storage systems are widespread. However, the picture is completely different in rural areas. The same tomatoes became 30% more expensive in rural areas. The shelf prices of potatoes, eggs, and flour rose much faster than in the city. In Crimea and border regions, this situation is now seen not only as an economic hardship, but also as a security issue. Images of gasoline queues and empty pumps circulating on social media further strain the public's patience. Although the government is trying to reduce tensions with short-term interventions, the public knows that these temporary solutions are not a permanent solution. Some economists expect a slight easing in supply in the fall. However, these predictions are based on the assumption that Ukraine's attacks on refineries and logistics centers will stop. At present, there is no sign that these attacks will cease. This keeps the risk premium constantly high in rural areas. Thus, two different price universes are emerging within Russia: large cities and rural areas. While inflation, driven by the service sector, is discussed in centers like Moscow and St. Petersburg, the real issue in rural areas is simply access to food. The issue is not the shelf price, but whether there are products on the shelves. This deep inequality has even begun to change people's consumption habits. Internal migration has gained momentum again. Young people and the working population are moving to large cities, which are more expensive but more predictable. The countryside, meanwhile, is becoming increasingly quiet, impoverished, and angry. Despite this picture, state statistics agencies talk about high levels of prosperity. The average salary figure of 97,645 rubles, announced in February 2025, may appear to be a sign of prosperity on the surface, but in reality, it has little to do with purchasing power. The items driving this figure upward are mostly war reparations, risk premiums paid to soldiers going to the front, and incentives pumped in by the defense industry. But for a teacher passing through the turnstile in the Moscow metro, a widow living on her pension in Siberia, or a cleaner in the Urals, this increase is just an illusion. As we enter 2025, nominal wage increases in job postings have slowed significantly. Moreover, this stagnation has been overshadowed by rapidly rising living costs. The figure reflected on the paycheck may be rising, but the real value entering the household wallet is rapidly eroding. As increases in electricity, water, natural gas, and transportation erode net income, citizens struggle each month to fit a smaller shopping basket and a larger bill into the same salary. Now, the most frequently heard sentiment on the streets of Russia is, "We are working, but we are becoming poorer." Optimism in the shop windows is not convincing unless the mood in the kitchen improves. The Kremlin is dusting off some classic but problematic formulas to curb food inflation. Long-term fixed-price contracts or direct price caps on basic products such as milk, eggs, sugar, and potatoes are on the agenda. These steps may calm the shelves at first, but experience shows that in the medium term, shortages, quality declines, and under-the-counter price increases become inevitable. The supply chain begins to circumvent these restrictions through indirect methods. Weight is reduced, fat content is lowered, and cheap additives are added to the ingredients. The product quietly changes while the label remains the same. Although nothing appears to have changed on the shelves, consumers actually start buying less and lower quality products for the same price. Shrinkflation, or invisible inflation, is the phantom tax of this era. The packaging is the same, but the amount of product inside quietly decreases. Since the 2010s, many product groups have seen reductions of 7 to 20 grams. Now, with the economic crisis, this trend has picked up speed again. When the packaging crisis erupted after 2022, manufacturers turned to cheaper, thinner, less printed materials. Result: packaging shrunk, information became harder to access, and content was hidden. By mid-2025, Russian consumers had to start paying attention not only to the price of the product, but also to the cost per gram, the contents of the package, and differences in weight between brands. Because the difference between two yogurts on the same shelf is no longer just about taste, it's a matter of survival. As citizens struggle to survive, another tragic step comes from the Kremlin: food coupons. These coupons are electronic cards given to low-income citizens starting in 2025, allowing state-approved grocery shopping, excluding alcohol and tobacco. Unlike ration cards linked to shortages during the Soviet era, this system aims to tackle inflation-driven poverty and support local agriculture under sanctions. In other words, the Russian food card, the modern version of the food coupon, functions as a digital voucher loaded with state-funded credits. It can only be used at approved retailers for basic approved grocery items such as bread, dairy products, and vegetables. Food coupons signal to both the public and observers that the state prioritizes survival over prosperity. Unfortunately, the harsh conditions for ordinary Russian citizens do not end there. Fear of a second wave of mobilization runs deep. The first wave, which took place in the fall of 2022, was chaotic and traumatic. The public reaction was so violent that the Kremlin now avoids even using the word mobilization. Instead, governors and factory managers impose unofficial quotas. They use pressure, persuasion, and in some cases, bribes to achieve their goals. Those targeted include debtors, migrant workers with unstable status, men from troubled families, and those too weak to resist. Many are pressured by relatives. Some volunteer to get out of debt. Others go because they have no better option. When they return, they are often exposed to post-traumatic stress disorder, severe trauma, and an environment where violence is normalized. Meanwhile, the labor shortage is growing. Migrants are filling the gap, especially in construction, logistics, and agriculture. This is causing tension. While civil authorities welcome them, security forces take harsh measures, accusing them of everything from terrorism to economic sabotage. In some cities, raids and deportations have become routine. Education has dramatically deteriorated. Teachers are required to give patriotism lessons. Universities have been purged of dissidents. Professors who speak the truth risk being labeled foreign agents and losing their jobs. In technical fields, even attending international conferences can lead to accusations of treason. One of the most fundamental changes since the start of the war is the Russian government's attitude toward its own laws. The Duma now passes laws that are clearly contrary to the Russian constitution, and no one even pretends to care. Courts, once at least nominally independent, now function as the enforcement arms of the executive branch. Cases are no longer about evidence or justice. They are about sending a message. New laws are deliberately drafted with vague language. General terms such as discrediting the armed forces or extremist activity allow prosecutors and judges to interpret them as they see fit. Political opponents are either imprisoned or exiled. Anyone who voices dissenting opinions risks being labeled a foreign agent. This label imposes serious legal restrictions on publishing, education, receiving money, and even personal freedoms. It is a letter of shame designed to isolate and intimidate. For many, it means the end of a career, the beginning of surveillance, and constant fear. Moreover, even the country's elites feel this fear deep down. In pre-war Russia, belonging to the elite meant one thing above all else: security, access to budget flows, freedom from prosecution, a life above the rules. Power acted as a shield, and the higher you climbed, the thicker your armor became. That era is over. Today, the same people who once felt untouchable are facing increasing uncertainty, and in some cases, outright fear. The war changed the rules. As the economy becomes increasingly militarized and the political climate hardens, even well-connected officials are under pressure. In today's Russia, the most rational strategy for an ordinary life is no longer courage, but invisibility. For millions of people, survival means keeping quiet, bowing your head, and blending into the crowd. Not asking questions, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to care. These are no longer just social skills, but vital reflexes. Because if the system notices you, it first watches you, then crushes you. Not drawing attention has become a kind of armor. Feigning loyalty, appearing to internalize the role assigned by the state, sometimes even controlling your facial expressions while watching television is part of this strategy. Sometimes pretending not to hear conversations about the war on a crowded bus. Sometimes responding with silence when a neighbor's child is sent to the front. Now, survival depends not on intelligence, but on instinct, not on hope, but on caution. The golden rule for existing in Russia is this: don't let the system notice you. If you found this deep analysis useful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and contribute with your comments. Every like and subscription helps us reach more people with this kind of content. See you in new analyses. Stay tuned. Thank you.